Hello, and welcome to Forget What You Learned, a place for families to stop and reflect on the modern state of education. We empower you to challenge your own thinking about today's traditional school system and ask the question, are my kids thriving? I'm Cory Greenberg, a parent in the trenches just like you, and I chat with innovators, experts, and other parents who are changing the conversation, inspiring families to reevaluate how we define academic success. This podcast is brought to you by Pacific Preparatory, who is molding education through innovative one-on-one learning for students in today's digital world. When you hear boarding school, what comes to mind? For many, it's ivy-covered walls, old school traditions, or even punishment. But the truth is far more complex and interesting. In today's episode, we're pulling back the curtain on the world of boarding schools with education consultant and former boarding school student, Krissy Naspo. With over a decade as a consultant and 12 years inside boarding schools in various roles, Krissy has helped hundreds of families navigate this process, from students aiming for the most competitive schools to those needing more structure, support, or therapeutic environments. We talk about everything: who boarding school is and isn't for, how the process works, the wide range of school types and student needs, what day-to-day life is really like, and how to know if this option might be right for your child. We also bust myths about access, motivation, and the idea that boarding school is just for elite or troubled kids. Whether you're boarding school curious or seriously considering it, or have no idea about the boarding school world, Krissy offers a grounded, compassionate look at what's possible and how to find the right fit. Can't wait for you to listen in. Hello, and welcome to the show. When most people hear boarding school, they picture ivy-covered buildings, strict rules, or maybe a scene from a movie. But the reality is far more nuanced and diverse. Today, we're diving deep into what boarding school really means in today's world. Whether you've wondered what these schools are actually like, are exploring options for your child, or just want to better understand the range of possibilities out there, this episode is for you. I'm thrilled to be joined by Krissy Naspo, an experienced and trusted education consultant who's been helping families navigate the boarding school landscape for over a decade. Before becoming a consultant in 2013, Krissy spent 12 years working inside boarding schools in admissions, financial aid, and student placement. She's held leadership roles at schools like Hillside, Portsmouth Abbey, and St. Andrews in Rhode Island, and has placed hundreds of students, from those aiming for the most competitive academic environments to those needing more specialized, supportive, or therapeutic settings. Krissy brings a deep understanding of how to match students with schools that truly fit, not just on paper, but emotionally, socially, and developmentally. She's worked with traditional boarding school candidates as well as students navigating significant challenges, and she's known for her compassionate, clear-eyed approach to this big decision. Today, we'll unpack all the layers of boarding school: who it's for, how the process works, what families should look for, and how to think about fit. We'll also bust some common myths, talk about how the landscape is changing, and explore what makes this option meaningful for the right students. Let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Krissy.
Thank you, Cory. Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
Oh my gosh. I am so excited to talk to you about this topic. And I really want to start with a very general question, a simple question. Who is boarding school for? Because I mentioned in my little intro that I feel like there's a common kind of theme that people think of with boarding school, but that's actually not what it's all about. So let's start there.
Yeah, the thing that I always love about boarding school, and you gave the background really well, which is all the specifics and generalities of all the big pieces, and I think that is the big piece here is that boarding school can be for everybody. Boarding school can be for a wide range of students, and each boarding school environment has something to offer everybody in a different way. So boarding school is not a one size fits all, and it isn't only one type of student student does well at boarding school. There are over 350 boarding schools in our country, and more than that, and day schools that have boarding, and a whole range of what exists in that category. But the truth is that depending upon what a student is looking for, boarding school just offers opportunity. It's smaller class sizes, it's a smaller learning environment, it's more rigorous academics, it's more activities and more clubs, and more of a reason to, like, they're requiring sports and activities that kids have to do. So for kids that want to be joiners, it's a great place to be a joiner. And for those that are reluctant to be joiners, it's a great place because they're going to make you be a joiner in some ways. But there's also the fantastic part of the positive peer culture that happens in boarding schools, right? It's so much easier to get kids to do something when you have 100 kids doing the same thing at the same time. I don't care how structured a family or system is, or how structured a home environment is. It's a lot harder to get your one 16-year-old to do something. But when you have 100 16-year-olds doing the same thing at the same time, it just works, right? And you have faculty there that enjoy working with middle school and high school aged kids. Like, that is the kid they want to work with. That's who they enjoy working with. And I would say most parents have a hard time enjoying their adolescence sometimes, but that's the benefit of boarding school. People are doing it because they want to be with those kids. And that's a huge difference.
Okay, I love that. Yeah, there's so many attractive things about that, that you may be missing out on the teenage years that are rife with struggle and conflict
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's not actually necessarily why parents send their kids to boarding school,
Mhm.
right? I think that's another sort of misconception, is that if your kid is giving you a really hard time, you're going to ship them off to boarding school.
Yeah, and I love that. You know, when I was a boarding school person, I had people all the time say to me, "Hey, Chrissy, is there a movie we could show our student that will show boarding school in a great light, make them want this?" Right? When a parent thought they wanted it for their kid, but they wanted their kid to be excited. And I was like, no, it actually doesn't exist. Right. And the truth is, like, if you think about summer camp with books, that's the best way to look at boarding school. Right. But it isn't. That's the minority. The myth is that, yes, I'm sending my kid to boarding school because they're not doing what they need to, and they need more structure and they need more of this and that. But the truth is, if your student doesn't want to be at boarding school and doesn't want to be in that environment, then they're likely not going to be successful. So, who's not successful at boarding school? Kids who don't want to be there, right? In my experience, though, and I will tell you that in 12 years, I still can only think of two kids in 12 years that boarding school was really not right for. And that's, I mean, that's all age groups. That's three different schools. And even when I went to boarding school myself as a student, I was part of a boarding community. I was a day student, but uh, I still can only think of, in those years included, maybe one student in all those years. So I think the reality is boarding school can be right for a lot of kids, very frequently. But I do think the myth of, like, we just send our kids away, boarding schools don't want kids that don't want to be there. And that's a big thing. Like, when I get parents who will call me all the time and say, "Chrissy, I think my kid needs boarding school." And there's a lot more going on than what a boarding school can do. And I'm like, no, that's actually not boarding school, right? Boarding school can't create motivation in kids. They can create an environment that feels engaging, that can help kids engage in something because the culture is positive and those kinds of things. But if a student doesn't want to be there, you're not, we can't do that in boarding school, right? We can't create motivation that doesn't exist. We can create an engaging environment that exists. That's the difference, I think.
Yes, I love that, because I do think, when parents are exhausted by the parenting journey for whatever reason, it could be a completely neurotypical kid, like there could be even no mental health stuff going on, none of that complications, but just a feeling that, parents are not able to provide the kids with the opportunity in their community. Like, that's what
100%.
you said, that's really. Talk
100%.
to me about that. Like,
So
what's
that's
kind of
the
a
majority of
profile of a
kids
kid
going
like
to
that?
boarding school, right? Like, that
Okay.
is actually the majority of kids going to boarding school. It's families who are looking for more opportunities. So, for example, their student they have a child who learns differently, who needs a smaller class size, who needs someone who can give them a specific type of learning, whether it's remediation or just additional support. That's the majority. The majority of the families that I've worked with and that I lived with when I was a boarding school dorm parent, those kids were not there there because their parents didn't want to have time with them, right? What it
Mhm.
ultimately was is that they didn't have what they needed locally, and this environment was going to give them more of what they needed, whether it was more structure and consistency for the ADHD student who needs more structure and needs their day to be more structured, right? That every parent has a hard time giving that when they've got three kids at home and they're driving here to there and they've got activity to activity and things like that. So it's the opportunity side of it. It's
Mhm.
also one-stop shopping, right? They're the most amazing thing at boarding schools is that you can be an athlete, you can be an artist, you can be a musician all in one location and get everything right where you are. So say you need to have music lessons, well guess what? They have music teachers come to these schools all the time and give music lessons, right? So you want to be able to perform, but you're also a great lacrosse player and you want to be able to learn more about that. Guess what? They have turf at a lot of these places. They're playing lacrosse year round at the schools in New Hampshire when it's freezing. They've got turf. They're still using it, right? Like so there's a lot of opportunity and I think that's a big thing. You also get to play more with your friends. There's something to be said for every day at boarding school. You're doing sports or activities from 3 to 5 every day after school. So every kid's running around, every kid's getting that extra exercise and getting sort of the natural endorphins moving. And so, for mental health perspectives, like that's a really big positive, right? And I think the other thing that you can find at boarding school that families are looking for, like the hard part is not every family system is designed to be able to do this. We have divorced families, we have family that has loss of parent, we have a number of kids in a household where maybe one student has more needs than another. And so really what you're doing when you provide boarding school is just providing an opportunity for them to get what they need as an individual student and person and human being, right? And I think that I used to always say to parents, like, you while you were losing quantity of time, you're gaining quality time. You're no longer going to be like, pick your towel up off the floor. Did we get your haircut scheduled? Did you finish that project? Like you're no longer the laundry list of things. Like as the parent of a boarding school student, you're still going to say, how did you study for your test? How did this go? You're still sort of part of their portals and getting the data without having to be the one that's making sure those things are happening. And so it allows you to have a relationship with your child that is still very involved, but also you're not the nudgy poker person that they see their parents as sometimes. And I would say this is the other myth that we talked about a little bit generally, and that we always think about is like the schools, we want to partner with parents. Like when I was a boarding school person, I wanted parents I could partner with. I didn't want parents who were dropping their kids off to say, see you later, we'll pick them up fixed and ready, right? Like that's not really what boarding school is about. It's about growing, having them grow as an individual to become the people that you hope as parents that they become, right? Putting them in an environment with opportunities and meeting with kids. Like I was looking at a boarding school website yesterday, 21 states and 20 countries. And that's normal, right? To have that many states and that many countries at these schools. Like, where else do you want a world view when you've got kids from all of these different places? I mean, what a great place to learn US history or world history or and see it from someone else's perspective, right? It's just such a neat opportunity that people I think totally miss when they're thinking about like, oh, boarding school, it's just going to be a bunch of elite kids and it's just going to be a bunch of, all these privilege. And it's like, no, actually, like they're probably more diverse than you're going to have in your neighborhood because most of our schools are not that way. And so you're getting a more diverse experience. And I mean that by cultural, I mean by that class and socioeconomic, I mean that by countries, I mean that by states, I mean that by personal views and perspectives. And it's not a place that's leaning into any of those things. It's a place that's just saying we're open. Come check us out. And I think that's really neat as well.
Okay, so I have so many questions about everything you just said. I want to go back real quickly to you said the partnership, right, between the parents
Yes.
and the school.
Yep.
So how does that happen in practice? Because I'm envisioning all those little moments, like you said, nagging them to taking them to get a haircut, nagging them to unload the
Yeah.
dishwasher.
Yep.
These are the bane of my existence as a
Yep.
parent. I agree, but there's also those little moments of mentorship, connection, things like that that happen when you have
Yes.
your kid in the house. So
Yep.
how does the boarding school environment sort of continue to foster that? Or like what is the communication usually like between
Well,
parent and
so the
kid?
good news is that every student's assigned an advisor. Now, every school is going to do it slightly different, but every school there's an advisor system. That's one of the biggest things that boarding schools have. A lot of independent day schools have it as well. But at the boarding school, the advisor takes on a different role, right? The advisor role at the boarding school is to be the conduit between the parent and the school and to be a conduit like as the student advocate, right? So as a parent, you would reach out to the advisor and say, "Hey, is Johnny doing X, Y, and Z because I'm not seeing it on my end?" Or I know he said his knee was bothering him. Has he gone to the physical therapist on campus or has he gone to the trainer? And then the advisor could be like, let me check in with him on that, right? Or the advisor could say, hey, Johnny bumped his head today. He may not say anything to you. We've got him on this protocol so that we're making sure that he's all set, but just wanted you to know he's fine, but needed to give you the heads up and the update, right? So it's just sort of any sort of communication, right? It could also be the parent reaching out to the advisor to say, he's really struggling in math. Has he told you? And 9 times out of 10, they're like, yep, we're already working out a plan. He's going to go on Wednesday during his free period when that teacher is free too. So, again, that's sort of how you're partnering. You're using that advisor as a person. Also, at some schools, there's different residential staff, or like you use the dorm parent if it's something that has to do with the dorm time, you use the advisor if it has something to do with other things. So I think like different schools do that different way. Some schools even have dean for parents so that if you have a parent concern or question, you go to that person. They really want to make it so it's accessible, and they really want parents to teach their kids to be good advocates, right? They really want students to be the advocates for themselves. So as a parent, it's your job to figure out what are the resources like on this campus and how do I direct my kid to help them figure that out, right? So I have all these kids, we're right in the prime time of people doing revisits to boarding schools and visits and things like that, and parents are saying what should we be asking, and I'm like, you need to find out how do they get support if they're having trouble academically, if they are struggling with mental health or anxiety or whatever, who do they go to, what does that look like, right, on every campus. And as a parent, I want parents to know how to help their kids advocate and then go to their kids to say, you need to advocate for this. Or remember, there's that place you go to at the library where you can sign up for a peer tutor if you want one. So, like, know the school well enough that you can make those suggestions to your child. But also, if you know your child well enough to know they're not going to do it, that's when you reach out to the advisor and say, hey, I've encouraged Johnny to do this. Can you see and follow up so that I'm not the only one doing that? Right. So that's
Yeah.
how the partnership happens a lot, right? It's utilizing each other, and it's having been an advisor, there were times when I was saying, like, hey, go call your mom because she keeps calling me because she hasn't heard from you, right? And not that it's begrudging or making me angry or upset, but it's like she kind of misses you. Could she hear your voice? I get to see your voice every day. Like, go do that for her, right? And it's just sort of bringing that back. But they also, boarding schools do a great job of celebrating family. Lots of family weekends. There's a break almost every 6 weeks where they encourage kids to be with their parents, right? And then there's all the long vacations. Like, vacations are actually longer. And I find that because they're longer and you actually have to plan them and you have that schedule well in advance, it gives you a greater opportunity to make memories on those times when they are home. So you're doing a little bit more and sort of making it a little bit more pronounced in what you're doing. I think
Yeah,
it's
it's
just
more
being
more
mindful.
quality time, more quality
Yeah.
time. I
Yeah.
can see, and you were talking about how there's, you can count on one hand the number of kids where it's not a fit.
Mhm.
What about a kid that's introverted, that
Mhm.
might be really bright, might be driven, but, struggles a little bit more socially, or who's just gonna be a bit of a wallflower and who hasn't really learned that skill yet of advocating for themselves? Worst case scenario,
Yep.
let's say there's like, bullying or something going on where, like, who's kind of the one that's going to pick up on that
Well,
with
so
the
I will
parent?
say a couple things. That's a great question. And I will say the one thing I always say to people when they're looking at boarding school is like, you need to be at a certain point where you're comfortable with what you have done from a parenting perspective, from a core
Mhm.
values perspective, and from a like, what do we as a family, what are our values, and what do we find important? Like, some of that has to be done. And most parents are doing that before eighth grade anyway, right? Like, this is when you're doing that in middle school years a little bit. And yes, you still have time to develop that. But I would say that that's one of the things that as a parent, you want to be thinking about, like, what are our family values, because I do think making sure that kids have like a good sense of like who they are, and who they still want to become. No one needs to be a finished product, but they need to sort of have an idea of where are my stops and my starts a little bit. And I say that because guess what? Just like at public school, there's going to be people that wouldn't be positive or would be a negative impact or be a never negative influence, or like there's stuff going to be around. That's any school, right? That's not just a boarding school. Although
Yep.
people think it's more at boarding school, it's actually not. Um, but I do think generally, like that's one of the pieces. And to your question, I think, for the student who's quieter and shyer, I look at smaller schools, right? Like
Mhm.
I love some of the bigger schools, but I tend to believe that a smaller, more nurturing community is going to be better for that student. And that's the thing that's unique about boarding school. When we say a big school and boarding school, that's 1,000 kids, right? Like when you're in a public school system, you can have 1,000 kids in a grade, right?
Yeah.
But in boarding school, 1,000 in 5 grades, which is 9 through 12 and post grad, right? That's spread out, right? So for us, 1,000 is the biggest boarding school. We have one that has 1,100, right? Most boarding schools are going to be between the 350 and the 500 range. You have a group between 700 and 1,000, and then you have a group that are smaller than 300. We have a whole group of boarding school called the Small Boarding School Association, SBSA, right? And it's all they all have to have a boarding school size of smaller than 200 boarders, right? And so, but most of those schools are still 70% boarding, but they're still 70% boarding is only 200 kids, right? So, that's the kind of school where sometimes like a student who is really smart but has a hard time advocating, or like that's the kind of school where sometimes those kids can do really great, or one of the 400-person schools, because what they can do in that is everyone's going to get to know that student for who they are and meet them where they are, right? And I think that those communities tend to be a little bit more well-rounded. You tend to have a range of kids, and you can see like when you visit schools, when you look at what they're putting out online and things like that, you can understand which schools feel a little jockier, feel a little more artsy, feel a little bit more cerebral. Like there's a range of that. And then you've got some progressive schools, right? Where the kids pretty much self select that are going to be there. And they're smaller, much smaller schools, right? So I think what you have as parents have to look at when you're thinking about your own individual child is you can't think about my kid will rise to the occasion. I know he will. I know he will rise. If he has other kids around him who are really engaged, like he'll rise. I would say that 9 times out of 10, will your child rise? Maybe. But when I hear that from a parent, that makes me more worried because I think it's that they, as parents in that situation, would rise. But will their child actually rise in that scenario and situation? That's a big difference, right? And so I think sometimes that my job as a consultant is to say, okay, listen, I've now met 5 times with your kid, and I'm not seeing the kid who's going to step up and rise up the way that you expect them to. I think here's the ways that they can excel and be successful. But here's why I think we need to look at this kind of school, because I think that your child can be a superstar in something smaller, right? And that's the whole big fish, small pond, and vice versa. Like, I think sometimes that is the right environment. And yet, I meet some kids where they're like ready to sharpen their elbows and go to the most competitive places. And they do really thrive in that environment. And I usually see that in my kids that are like, let's go, Chrissy, more application stuff. What's next? What's next? What's next? Like they're driving me to drive their process. Right. And so those are the kids that typically are going to go to those most competitive places. They already have that motivation. They're already interested in doing it. For the kids that are smart enough for that, but don't have the get up and go, that's going to be a little bit more of a like, hold on, let me get to know this student a little bit more as we build that list, because I think there are those kids could be successful in that environment, but they might also thrive instead of survive if we went to something else and a different type of option, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's one reason why people can really benefit from your guidance with that, because I think, like you had mentioned to me before, that some parents will come to you and say, "Well, if I'm going to send my kid to boarding school, I want the best of the best." And your
Mhm.
job as the consultant is to say, "Well, wait a second," and unpack everything you just did in terms
Yep.
of who is my kid and what's going to be the best fit for them. So, and you
Yeah.
had also said to me that, some of the more competitive ones that you may have heard their name, it's like you do have to be a little bit more of a fully formed human to
Yes.
enter
Yeah.
those, right? And to
Yeah.
be successful
Yeah.
because there's just less supports. Like,
Yes.
those kids are really self-motivated,
Well,
like you
there's
said.
less supports, but there's also like their faculty feels a little bit like Their job is to help get these really smart, accomplished kids to the next level. Like that is their goal. But they then expect the kids to be at a certain place to be able to get to do their job of getting them to that next level. Right.
Yeah.
So the myth in some cases is like, if I go to the best boarding school, then I'm going to go to the best college. And the truth is,
Oh,
if you
yeah.
go to some of the best boarding schools, you may not get to the best college. Because guess what? There's now 40 kids applying to those best colleges from those best boarding schools. And if you went to another school that was a little bit lower, but still just as competitive and has all these great opportunities and programming, you might actually have a better chance because there's only 3 of you applying to that best college and you can set yourself apart differently, right? And it's not to say that then what you're not gaining is an amazing experience at that best boarding school, right? Because you are like, you're gaining your network, you're gaining like people, you're gaining a culture from a standpoint of like learning and being engaged in learning and wanting to have excitement around learning, right? um Rarely do you find a boarding school, I don't even care what level the boarding school is, where kids don't actually want to do well, where it's like, like, yes, there are some kids that will struggle at boarding school, they'll be average. They would have been average if they were at home, but now they're in a community that they really love with people that they're really enjoying, and they're being praised because they're an amazing soccer player, even if they're not the best student, or they're being praised because they've been like the number one fan person at all of the games, or they just get to know the individual kiddo so much, that you embrace who the student is. I mean, I think back to my years in boarding schools, and I worked at an all boys junior boarding school at one point, and so it was the little guys, grades 5 to 9, and boarding, and we had some quirky kids at that school, because we had a great social thinking curriculum, and we had great academic support, and we had this great curriculum. But we had this one boy, and our most superstar athletes, one of whom, by the way, is playing professionally in basketball, right? Like, he's now on an NBA team, was so nice to this one little boy who loved vacuums.
Oh, wow.
Like, he was into it, he loved them. We let him vacuum at recess, as a treat, when he felt like he wanted to, and, he was at a school with a kid who's now in the NBA, and those kids could be friendly, right? So, it's just a really interesting place that boarding school can be that, because you get to know everybody within your community, and even if you don't know them individually and personally, in some cases, you absolutely know their stories in a positive way, and it's about acceptance and tolerance and sort of understanding, like, we all have our strengths and we all have our things that we're good at and we all have things that we struggle in, right? So that's kind of a neat place, that boarding school can be in a unique spot, how boarding school can do that for people, which I think is really valuable.
So then what about access? Because I was kind of surprised by the statistics that you had shared with me. I think another misconception is that, I mean, we know it's very expensive, but that
Yes,
it is
correct.
only for, the top 1%. So that's not true, is it?
Well, the nice thing about it is that lots of schools really do care about having kids from all different socioeconomic levels and classes, and really want to have a diverse group in their student population. And so that does mean there's a variety of things out there. There's a couple schools that have these specific scholarships for kids from different places around the world. There are schools that, if your family makes less than a certain amount of money, then if you're accepted into the school, you get to go automatically, or they meet 70% of your need, or, there's things like that. But the truth is that about 30%, of students receive some level of financial aid at a variety of these boarding schools, right? Like, I know in the scheme of things, we could sit here and say it's only 30%. But the truth
Right.
of the matter is, like, 30% could be a full scholarship where they're giving them money for travel and computers and various things like that. Or they're getting just a little piece of something, right? Maybe they're just giving financial aid to kids that are full pay, that are given opportunities to go on some of the amazing, trips that they provide, whether it's abroad or it's a foreign language class that does something, or some schools have what they call Wintram, which is like a 2 week hands-on learning experience where they go do marine biology or tropical ecology, or things like that, in all these different places. And so they want to make sure that those opportunities are not just for kids that have resources. I was a student in high school who was on financial aid, right? And who wouldn't have had the experience without having financial aid as an opportunity for myself. And My parents very clearly said to me, like, for when it came for winter time, they're like, you can go on 2 trips and you have to do two on campus because that's all we can afford, right?
Yeah.
And so I picked my trips carefully, like what years, and it was a lottery. So you know, if I once I finished my 2 trips, my parents were like, you can only put on campus ones now. Um, but I think that there's a lot of conversations that families have to have with their kids about this, because I do think, yes, there's always going to be the people who can afford to send 7 people to these schools. And then there's the people who can barely afford to send one. And I think the access still exists and schools make it their priority, right? There's all different groups and they do a lot with a better chance. And there's a million different foundations out there. That are doing a variety of things, and so there's kids that are applying from some of them. When I was an admissions person, we took kids from all of these different programs all the time, but it is harder and harder as the tuition rates go up. So schools are doing, they're trying to add more to their endowment for financial aid or scholarships. Like there's a lot of schools working hard to try to maintain what they've got and maintain a more diverse community. I think that's been really important. And I think that we're not getting any cheaper in anything that we're looking at.
Right.
Um, and I think the schools wish they could stop too. But, so much of what, having worked in school, so much of what it is like in the people. And you don't want to get rid of the people because you need these amazing teachers to help keep these kids engaged and do all this amazing stuff. So I think that we're going to continue to see more schools struggle with the finances of all of this. But I have to say that post COVID, boarding schools have boomed, right? Like we've been lucky that we've seen increase in numbers and applications and increase in size of schools, and even schools that right size post COVID to say like we don't need to stay this big. We should really be here. We should be there. They're doing it about like how can they deliver the most programming and to get the kids really what they need and what they want. So the focus is still always on the student experience, and I think that's really what boarding school is about, is the student experience.
I'm glad you said that about just kind of changing trends. One of the things I'm wondering about is the teachers. Do boarding schools have trouble recruiting teachers? Like, do most of the teachers live on campus, or
Yeah.
are they
So
local, or
so
wait,
the
like, how does that work?
So it's such an interesting thing. So years ago when I started in boarding school, you were called the triple threat, right? You lived in a dorm, so you were a dorm parent, you coached, and you were a teacher. And for me, I worked in admissions, so I coached, I lived in a dorm, and I worked in admissions. And so you do a lot. And like the triple threat has like people look at it now and they're like, "Oh my gosh, how did you do that?" Like I worked every other night and every other weekend for 2 years, right?
Wow.
It's kind of crazy, but you pay nothing for housing. I had no bill. I had a cell
Mm,
phone bill. Like that was the only bill I had to pay the whole time I
yeah.
was doing that, right? Now, things have shifted. It's not quite that the same way it once was 24 or 5 years ago, not quite the same anymore. But I will say that I do think boarding school teachers, it's a lifestyle, right? Like
Mm,
you choose it because it's a lifestyle choice and decision. They like that they can coach most of the time, right? They like coaching. They want to be able to do that and have that interaction. Their academic day is from like 8:30 to 3, and then they coach 1 or 2 seasons, right? But that means they get out of their classroom by 3 o'clock. They're running around with kids outside. Like that's okay. If you're a dorm parent, you do that for a while. You get to hang out with these kids in the evening and you rotate what nights you do that. I love going to the mall and the movies with my kids on the weekends. It was part of how I built my relationships with kids, right? It was part of how these adults can be meaningful in your kid's life, right? Because they're doing the good, the bad, and the ugly with them, right? Like they're side by side doing community service, but they're also side by side, like, doing something amazing together, right? Experiencing or whatever it is. And I think that makes a difference. I would say they don't make a ton of money in boarding school. I think like they actually make less than public school teachers in most cases, but then they get their housing. So
right.
depending upon where you live in the world and where you live in parts of the country, it's actually pretty great to be able to have housing on this beautiful 80-acre campus where you have an athletic center, a gym,
Yeah.
like there's some neat things. So it's not always terribly hard to get teachers. Sometimes it's hard to retain or maintain them because it can be hard in some ways. And I will say one of the hard things is I don't think they do as great of a job attracting more diversity within the teaching populations. That's their hardest population. And that's because of numbers. If you think about what the percentage of kids are international, or what percentage of the kids are faculty, are students, are people of color, they're doing amazing work in trying to do that and increase that. But it's just to the point of how many of those kids are in these populations,
Yes.
right? That all these schools want it. All these schools are looking for more diversity. All these kids are looking for a nice range of learners and people, and they want, the more rich the community, the better the experience for everyone. And so I think
Yep.
that that's the place where faculty, they're always aiming to get more and more. But there's very few schools out there that would say, "Oh, we've got it exactly where we want it." It's just, and that's part of it's like generationally, people want to make more money and do less work, and that's not what boarding school is, to be quite honest.
Yes, it's very immersive. I mean, I can't imagine having little kids and, teaching at a boarding school. That would
You know
be
what's so funny? One of my
challenging.
business partners raised her kids on a boarding school campus, and she said it was the best thing she ever did.
Oh,
Because what
okay.
she
Well,
loved
yeah.
about it was that, like, she could take her kids to the dining hall. They were playing with other faculty kids all the time. Like,
Yeah.
you actually then had built-in babysitters when you wanted it and needed it, right? Like, it actually, you raise them in this community. And it's funny because I think about when I was on my boarding school campus, like the faculty brat kids, and I was a fac brat at one point, so I can say that. But like, you know, you see them grow up and you see where they go to and where they become. And a lot of us end up back in boarding schools or working within that
Mm,
industry. And it's not because we had a bad experience. It's because we had like a really kind of cool experience.
yeah.
And it's funny, like in the firm that I work with, we have a number of us doing boarding school and whatever, but like a lot of us went to boarding school ourselves, right? And so it's like easy for us to understand why we do what we do because we had such good experiences that we want people to have that opportunity. It changed our lives and it made us who we are and what we do. And I think that's the big piece of this is like, you find lots of people who went to boarding school who are like, yeah, it's not for me, but I'll do independent school for my kids, right?
Right,
Because they
right.
liked the education, they liked the small classes, they liked the pieces of it that they enjoyed, but maybe they didn't like other bits and pieces. I went the opposite, right? Like I had such a good experience that I knew I wanted to work and live in boarding school. And once I did it, I knew I wanted to share it because I think people don't always know what exists and what we are and what they are. It's not even a we anymore. I'm not doing it in that way, but I still feel like it's my world. And I still feel like the people that I've met and that in the industry are warm and amazing. And again, it's self-selected. You're choosing this all life. But by the way, you get 3 months off in the summer. You're off
Right.
in June, July, and August. You get 2 weeks at Christmas, 10 days at Thanksgiving, 2 weeks at March break. Like there's not a lot of jobs where you can be on vacation when your kids are on vacation, and that's kind of amazing too, right? So from a faculty perspective, there's definitely a reward from that side of things for sure.
I love that, and I think you've done such a phenomenal job today, Chrissy, of, like, peeling back the curtain, and I mean, I've learned a lot just from talking to you before we had this conversation and today. I really see boarding school in a different light than I think I did before. It was just not in my, worldview, like,
Yeah.
I didn't know that many people who did it
Yeah.
until working for Pacific Preparatory. We have had lots of kids come and go to boarding school, so it's a more in the conversation. But I think it's really important because I think there's a lot of people out there who just had the same misconceptions that I did coming into it, and now it's like, oh, okay,
Well, and
there's a
Corey,
lot more to the story.
a lot of it's geographic, right? So,
Yeah,
years ago when I would get a California kid and I was at a school in New England, they would have to they would have to sit and talk to their friends like we're sending our kids to boarding school, and their friends looked at them like you're sending her away, and
yeah.
like. It was not that, but I remember having to have conversations with a parent about it and be like, God, we went to church the other day and I had to tell my friends that I was sending her to boarding school and like the judgment that this parent felt, even though they knew. And then that student came home in October at the first break, and everyone was like blown away at how far that girl had gotten in literally
Aw.
6 weeks that she had been at school, right? So just really remarkable. And so it's a game changer. And parents will say when their kid comes home for that first break, like how much more mature they get, right? Like one of the things we
Mhm.
didn't talk about was how much independence is gained at boarding school,
Yeah.
how much individuating that they do. Like it's time that's that they're supposed to do at adolescence, but this sort of makes it happen. They tend to take better care of their space. They tend to make their beds, even though no one's making them in some cases. They tend to clear their dishes because that's what they do in a dining hall. They tend to do more of those basic things because that's just what happens around them. They push their chair in when they leave a table, like little things that become part of the culture because that's what we do, right? And I think that makes a big difference. Um, I think that makes a huge difference, but I also think it has changed in 20 years, right? That isn't the view anymore. Now it is definitely viewed as I'm providing an opportunity to my student, because we don't have it here, or because even if we could have it here, this is going to give even more. But
Yes.
it's a sacrifice, right? Like to your point as a parent, you were talking about mentoring and needing those little moments.
Yeah.
It is a sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
And even when kids want boarding school, I say to those kids, like, your parents are allowing you to do this, right?
Mhm.
Like, they're giving you this opportunity, and it's really hard on them. No parents, like, can't wait to send my kid to boarding school. Like,
Right.
and the ones that are saying, I want to send my kid to boarding school, like we talked about earlier, those kids are maybe not going to boarding school because
Yeah,
it's
you
not
may be
their
counseling them
kid.
out of that decision and saying,
Exactly.
Let's rethink this." Yeah. No, I think that's a perfect, way to kind of segue to ending this. I send my kids to summer camp, and everything you said in the beginning, "This is summer camp with books."
Jesus.
I totally get that, because they do come back, they're building in that, individuation and that accountability piece
It
that I
is.
do feel like is missing from our day-to-day parenting. And so it's launching them a little bit earlier than going
It
off to
is.
college,
It
but,
is.
that and it's not for everyone, like you said, but it's probably for a lot more people than we might think.
Yeah, I
So,
would agree. I had a parent just yesterday say to me to that point, like their students did junior boarding school and now they're in the boarding school process. And they went to one of these revisits and they kept saying, like, all the questions that all the parents are asking, like, how am I going to know if I'm ready? How are they ready?
yeah.
And that mom who'd sent her son to junior boarding school was sort of like, guys, this is gonna be amazing. Like, your kid's gonna grow up so much.
Yeah.
Like, she feels like her kids are her buddies now, even though she's still the parent, she's not just their friend. She just feels like she's got a different relationship with them since they've had that opportunity, and the maturity that happened and the appreciation that they feel for their parents now for giving them the opportunity has been the thing that I think has surprised this family the most, right? Like, wow, our kids really appreciate what we've done.
Yeah.
We never would have expected that. So, it's kind of a neat process.
Well, I think I already know what you're gonna say for this, but our closing segment is forget this, try that. So, can you I mean, we've spent this whole episode talking dispelling
Yes.
myths, but can
Yeah.
you, like, distill it down to just one outdated educational parenting practice that you would like people to forget, and what would you replace it with?
I would replace that boarding school is only for elite or trouble kids. That is not the case. I would say that boarding school is the place where kids can thrive.
I love it. Okay, so lastly, where can people find you if they wanna work with you in terms of shepherding them through this whole process?
Well, thank you for asking. I am the managing partner at the Bertram Group, www.thebertramgroup.com. I'm located in Connecticut, but I work with families all over the world and all over the US. And we have a whole team of people who are fantastic and work with a range of kids. We do a little bit of everything in our firm, and we have a person that's right for everybody. We trying to find the best match for schools and families. We find that finding the best match consultant wise for families is also really valuable, which is why we love having some depth in our team so that we can help figure out who's best on our team to help you get your best fit for your child. That's our goal.
Absolutely, and we will put, all of that in the show notes so people can find you, and I can personally vouch for Chrissy because 'cause we've partnered together on a couple of students who have come to Pacific Preparatory and or gone back to their boarding schools, and she's wonderful, to work
Thank
with,
you.
so, thank you so much for coming on the show, Chrissy. It's been just a pleasure, and I can't wait for people to listen to your episode.
Well, thank you for having me. It was an honor to be asked. So thank you. I appreciate being here and sharing boarding school, which I love. So thanks again.
Yeah, take care, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Forget What You Learned, hosted by me, Cory Greenberg. As always, our goal is to allow you to zoom out on the snapshot of your family's life and answer the question, are my kids thriving? We're here to inspire you to make those small and maybe big changes to answer yes. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Pacific Preparatory, an organization committed to educating students with an innovative and holistic approach in today's digital world. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave a rating and review. See you next time.